maybe it would be a good thing to cover again. So we're going to just maybe about 10, 15 minutes just covering the different views of Revelation. And I'm going to kind of drill down on 4 of them. And I'm not going to go deep here. I'm just going to kind of glaze over it. So if anybody has any questions about this, ask now. First is the idealist views. Last week we talked about the preterist view versus the futurist view. Do you really need to know this stuff? No. But you should. It's in rounding out your knowledge, it's helpful. Also, if somebody asks you what I'm teaching or what you're learning here, you'll be able to tell them after this. And also know that there's not one of these is right, okay? They're all kind of right, and they all have positives and they all have negatives. Scholars have argued about this stuff for years. It's interesting though, as we go along, as we get smarter, as technology gets better, things become, I think, clearer to us. Okay.
Well, didn't the same knowledge will increase?
Exactly. So, and I just think, and it's like I said last week, I was always on the fence. I jumped off the fence. I went full futurist view. And I think that's from knowledge increasing. So anyway, I don't want to spend a lot of time on here. So like I said, stop me if I get going too fast. Idealist view, and I'm not going to follow the verbiage here exactly, but it's the same idea. People that hold the idealist view, and sometimes it's called the symbolic or the spiritual interpretation of Revelation. This view does not take a literal historical view, but it sees the entire book of Revelation as a symbolic presentation of the battle between good and evil. Okay? The symbols we see in Revelation are not thought of to refer to specific individuals and historical events, but to typical individuals and events that just happen. For instance, the example is that every generation has an Antichrist, okay? And every generation is going to have a mark of the beast. Any number of people or leaders that exalt themselves against God are Antichrist. Islam, Nazis, all receive a mark, okay? And the idealist view says that every part of the church, maybe not the whole church, but parts of the church are always struggling. They're always struggling against good and evil, okay? It's been around for years, thousands of years. It was made prominent by Augustine in AD 354. And this view, like a lot of preterists, will use this view to complement their view. The preterist idealist views are very common. The positive aspects of this is it avoids the difficulty of matching specific passages with specific fulfillments. Okay, so as we went through the 7 churches, I assign those to specific dates and specific things that happened in history. They approach all that as whatever, okay?
That's probably not as popular today as it
used to be. It's not.
Yeah.
So
I see that as being one of the problems why the Jews don't accept Christ is because, predators, all the things that were in 66 AD weren't fulfilled, like.
which, we're talking about, are you talking about preterists?
Preterists,
Well,
yeah,
let me get
because
there first,
the
okay?
Jewish, are that interpretation that those things were supposed to be fulfilled, but they weren't.
Okay, so the idealist view, the biggest concern with this view, or the biggest problem with this view is in Revelation 1:1, it tells us that all this stuff is gonna happen.
Must soon take place.
Okay, so if you're idealist, you're reading different spiritual meanings into the text. Okay, it's based solely on one person's opinion, and it's not based on scripture. The preterist view sees preterist view sees Revelation as largely fulfilled in actual events that have already happened. Preterism is divided into two types. There's full preterist, some call them hyper-preterist, and then there's partial preterism. I'm going to talk about full preterism right now. It denies the future prophetic quality of the book of Revelation. It teaches that the end time prophecies of the New Testament were fulfilled in AD 70. And that's when the Romans attacked and destroyed Jerusalem. It also teaches that every event normally associated with end times and Christ's second coming, the tribulation, the resurrection of the dead, the final judgment, it's all already happened, okay?
We're living in heaven.
Pretty much, it gets good.
This is as good as it gets.
Well, it's supposed to get better. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you got it pretty good. I mean, come on. Yeah, you got to get out of that one now. Preterists like to use the Olivet Discourse, and what they like to use is Matthew 24:34, which says, "Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until these things have happened." They say he was Jesus. So actually what they're doing is they're taking an ultra-literal interpretation of what Jesus said, that it's that generation that Jesus was living in. So, and it's kind of interesting because as you look at these different views, everybody kind of jumps back and forth. But
Preterists miss the going away, taken away by the rapture.
well, and actually, full preterism. Well, I can get ahead of myself. The problems with preterism is that it requires a writing before 70 AD. It's defensible, but it's pretty much, this has kind of gone away too. People that are preterists, that were full preterists, kind of went to being partial, okay? Also, the historical view of the seven churches, they don't fit into that pre-AD, that 70 AD culture or history. And it also renders this book irrelevant to the church today. I mean, if you're a full preterist and you believe it all happened, why study Revelation, right? It doesn't matter anymore. It's
So you don't
happened.
receive a blessing.
Exactly. Actually, 7 of them, but yeah, 7 of them. The big thing, and some people will say that preterism is heretical because of this, that it denies the second coming of Christ. Okay. Partial preterism it again denies that the prophecies in Daniel and 24 and Revelation, and this is where partial differs, the last 2 or 3 chapters have already been fulfilled. So in partial, they still believe that there's no rapture, and the passages describing tribulation and the Antichrist are actually still referring to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. The difference is that, and they also maintain that the chapters that we're in now, 6 through 18, will all be symbolic, okay? And not describing actual literal events. Partial preterists take chapter 19 as literal, okay? Then chapter 20 is symbolic, and then chapters 21 and 22 are literal again. So they believe in the second coming.
Well, who decides what's literal and what's symbolic?
Well, and there you go. I mean, and you can say the same thing about futurist view too. So all that can be said. It's just that, like I said, the more we get to know, the more that's revealed to us, the more mysteries that are revealed to us, I think it gets clearer.
So the preterist doesn't explain the 144,000 of the 2 witnesses.
Right.
Because they haven't
It
arrived.
doesn't explain a lot of stuff.
They haven't arrived.
Right.
So that's a hole in that theory right there. And that's, and that's one of the reasons why the Jews rejected Christ is,
You get done.
but they don't take the full gospel, of Revelation and review, so.
See, I think I'm about a quarter preterist and about 3/4 futurist.
And from what you've said, I agree with that.
I see in the Olivet Discourse, half of the Olivet Discourse referring to the destruction of Jerusalem. But I also see that as a near fulfillment of a far fulfillment of what's gonna happen in the future with the tribulation and things like that.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I don't really know where totally I fit in, because I believe that there's gonna be a literal rapture. I still kind of deciding about when,
And that's fine.
Yeah,
And we'll,
this is a dialogue. It's not one of those dogma things where you gotta believe this to be a
Right.
Christian.
right,
No, you don't.
right.
So, but,
And
You have to remember.
most of the prophecies have been fulfilled, but there's about 200 of them that haven't been fulfilled.
All of Jesus's first coming prophecies were fulfilled.
Those were fulfilled.
Yes.
And you have to remember that history repeats itself.
yeah, and that's kind of the attraction of the idealist, because you could see philosophically, a lot of generations have experienced these things. So, sometimes I wonder if it's not either or maybe a little bit of both and, but again, this is something that for me personally, I'll study it for a month or 2, and then I'll put it down for 3 or 4 years.
Right.
And then I'll come back and study it for a month or 2.
And in those 3 or 4 years, things change.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
the historicist view
Mhm.
is a running account of all of church history written in advance from the time of John to the return of Christ. Bible prophecies are interpretive and representative of literal historic events. You're going to interpret the symbols or figures in the Bible as metaphors for actual events, nations, or persons of world history. This falls between preterism and futurism in its approach. The book of Revelation was prophecy when John wrote it, but most of the book has already been fulfilled in our day. This was huge. This was John Calvin, this was John Wesley, this was Jonathan Edwards, this was, well, some say it was Spurgeon, but in Spurgeon's writings, there's some, he's kind of different too. So as a running history, though, it makes Revelation relevant to all the ages. One of the major problems with this view is this was a response against the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Okay? So all the people that I named, including George Whitefield, William Tyndale, Martin Luther, this is thought, this holds prejudices.
Prejudice.
Thank you. This has it built into it, okay? So,
That in many ways have since dissipated.
right, right. Are you all still with me? Okay. Futurist view is what you're being taught, okay? If you remember,
Well, I have a question about, does Greek interpretation of generation mean the same thing that we think generation means?
I
This
don't,
generation will not disappear.
From what I recall, it can be interpreted broadly.
yeah,
It's not exclusively,
Like this
One
group of
generation.
people that I'm preaching to
Yeah.
now.
yeah, because Greek being so expressive has a wide range of meanings and it depends on the context and that's one of the dialogues of debate about that passage.
right. All right, futurist is what you're learning here. If you remember, we broke the book down into three sections. Chapter 1 was the things John saw. He described his vision. 2 and 3 are the things that are, which was the church age. And then chapter 4, we ended up in the throne room. And everything going forward is prophecy. Okay? It's literal. And why should we be literal? Because the Bible's literal. Okay? As I said earlier, all of Jesus' first prophecies about his first coming were fulfilled literally. So why, the question that literalists or futurists ask the other people is, if the Bible's literal, why would you change it, in the future just on a whim? Why would you do that? Now, we do all right, that's for a minute from now. All right, so for example, when the beast was captured in Revelation 19:20, the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who had performed the miraculous signs on his behalf. The two of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. We see that, I see that, as two individuals that are going to face the personal judgment of God and be punished. Okay? The spiritual interpretation simply sees a story, a morality story expressing, again, good versus evil. Okay? They don't see it as specific people. It's a good versus evil thing.
Seems like an awful stretch nowadays.
Yeah.
Well, the apostasy of the church in the last days, what's happened in the Roman Catholic Church in the last 5 years? Abortion, they advocate abortion and same-sex marriage. Totally against the Bible, 2,000 years ago. And those are some of the biggest apostasies that the churches, in the last 5 years.
It's hit Protestantism too.
And yeah.
And
And the birth
I
pains.
say, and it's hit
all
Protestantism too.
Yes.
There's Protestantry.
Right.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
But because of the earth situation, he says the birth pains, and then he says, things are not yet fulfilled. Just the beginning of things that are gonna happen, but apostasy's already here.
Right, but it's going to
And it's gonna get
worse.
I think the worst is there are other ways to heaven than Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
Okay?
I mean, that's what they're saying too.
So, just so you know, critics of this view say that we're too literal, okay? But we understand that some things are symbolic. And for instance, the description of chapter 1 of Jesus with a sharp sword coming out of his mouth it's obviously, it's symbolic, right? But it has a literal interpretation to it. Jesus will return and he will win the battle with his word, which is the sword. And also the horses that we're looking at now, there's no doubt John saw horses, okay? But those horses are symbolic. They all mean something.
Oh, I want to ride a horse when I come back.
Didn't say we were gonna be on this.
The four views of the rapture, and actually there's five, but we don't talk about one of them. The first one is pre-trib rapture. Again, that's what you're learning here. And you can see that's the rapture. The church is removed from the tribulation, and then Jesus' second coming. Mid-trib happens in the middle, rapture, 3.5 years, then Jesus' second coming. Post-tribulation is the church goes through the entire tribulation, is raptured at the very end. As we're raptured,
Then we come back.
we don't even make it to heaven. We get our white clothes and our crowns and whatever else and make a U-turn and follow Jesus right back to earth. Okay? Pre-wrath, it's up there because it was on the slide that I stole, so it's not very popular today. It happens at 5.5 years, 5.5 years. And if you look at it, it just takes, if I recall correctly, it just takes good Christians. It doesn't take all Christians, okay? So, I'm getting a cramp. Any questions about that? It's the pre-wrath is, the three main ones are post, mid, and
Where
post.
do you think we are now? Where are we? Are we,
Church age.
We're still in the church age.
which is what, first one, second, third?
This is what you're learning. You're learning pre-trib. We're
Pretty close.
right here somewhere. Okay?
Yeah, we hope it's
But
today.
the tribulation are basically for the Jews.
Post-tribulation, you'll never be disappointed.
All right.
I don't wanna have to.
Yeah, I know.
Tribulation was set for the Jews
The day of
to get the
Jacob's
Jews
trouble.
to come back to Christ.
That's what I'm
That's what the
saying.
tribulation is supposed to be for. And the church is gonna be raptured before the,
Oh, I don't care if I'm raptured before, middle, or late.
yeah,
As long as you're raptured.
Yeah,
and you don't take the mark of the beast.
I'm not gonna be disappointed.
During the
I don't know that the
tribulation.
mark of a beast is
It's
a
during the
literal
tribulation period.
thing. It's what you have in your head, your soul.
Well, if you're a believer, you're sealed by God. So you take a mark from God if you're a believer. So
3.5 years without eating, that's.
I believe both of them are literal.
I'll be taken care of.
As we know, the book of Revelation promises us an eternity, okay? There's 3 millennial views. You're learning premillennial here. You're learning pre-trib, premillennial. This is what you're learning. Again, we're here, rapture, tribulation, return, millennial kingdom, last judgment, it's the great white throne, and then eternity.
New heaven, new heaven.
Yeah. Post-trib looks like this. Everybody goes through the tribulation. No real rapture. Jesus comes. Remember, we're there in a U-turn. The millennial kingdom, eternity. Amillennialism we're in it now. We're living in the millennial kingdom now. It's,
I don't
things
see
are,
any line
things are
drawn
good and
around
getting
the
better
box.
through the word of Christ.
Boy,
Okay, so, they still show the second coming. And then post-millennial we talked about. So, any questions on that?
So the second coming is after the millennium?
Yes. For which?
For all
Yeah,
millennials.
it's after the millennial, it's after the 7
And
year
after.
It's
tribulation
after
period.
tribulation.
7 year tribulation period, then the second coming.
For amillennialism?
Yeah,
Amillennialism is no tribulation, no millennial kingdom, no nothing.
you just wait.
But I thought Christ was in the millennium. And that was.
It's a cross view.
He's
The
present with
millennium
us
is the
spiritually.
1,000-year reign of
Right.
Christ. 1,000-year
Symbolic
reign of
of
Christ
spiritual.
after the tribulation period.
It's Christ rules it's Christ rules in a spiritual kingdom. This is just real quickly, preterists are all millennial or post-millennial. What we talked about earlier, historicus, any of the three. So you can see this stuff's flexible, which is what adds confusion to the study, okay? Futurists, we're definitely premillennial, but as far as the rapture in futurist teaching, you will see the common ones are pre-trib, mid-trib's a close second. You won't find very many futurists that will teach post-trib. All right. Any questions on any of that?
What's the right way, Delisle?
What you're learning now?
But
I believe it's what you're learning now,
But
so.
like with the Catholic Church, and I don't mean to be giving them a bad rap, but, you know, they believed in purgatory and everything else, which was not in the Bible at all. And this was something they invented, hundreds of years ago, you know, and that was one of the other things that they started that didn't have anything to do with what the Bible said, so they weren't following the Bible when they come up with this scheme to, you know, and then they were gonna, try to pray people out of hell and, you know, it was a way for the church to get money to build all the cathedrals.
That's why Luther had his fit.
Yeah,
Right.
but then Luther went
As
off on the
soon
Jews,
as a
that wasn't
coin
good
in the copper rings, a soul from Purgatory Springs
Oh, my
was the
goodness.
preaching of, what was his name? I can't remember the Catholic preacher that Luther was, I forget my history now. But anyway, that was literally his sermon.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons that, and Luther wasn't originally trying to create a new church. He was trying to reform the Catholic
Yeah.
Church.
Right.
Which is worthy to know. But anyway,
Right.
I don't.
No, history, I'll listen to history because I'm weak in history, so I don't know, I'm not that great in history.
Well, we were listening to a priest say that we're all Catholic because Catholic means universal. So come on back to the Catholic Church because we're all Catholic.
Yeah,
Oh,
That's
wow.
little c.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a little,
Not capital K.
it's like if you quote the Apostles' Creed, a lot of times it'll
It
say.
says the Holy Catholic.
Right.
Yeah.
One
How many,
Catholic
how many Catholics do the priest actually get to encourage to read the Bible? They interpret it
Yes.
for the people. You know, when you start learning on your own,
It kind of,
then the light starts
depends.
coming clear, you know?
did,
Yeah,
not
we
so
did,
much
but not so much anymore.
No.
I've known a
You,
few.
what,
but anyway.
who came from Catholic?
I did
You did,
originally.
okay, and I know you did, and
so
Bernaldo.
did,
But no,
Okay.
they do Bible studies now and they are.
Yeah, they-
Well,
Right.
they used to do catechism, but see, that was their own Bible study. That wasn't exactly what the Bible says on a lot of the,
It was
Catholic
Catholic theology.
it was
Right.
Catholic theology.
And the Catholics have come a long ways, but they still have a long ways to go, so. Anyway, last week, we looked at things that still need to happen before the trib. Again, nothing needs to happen before the rapture. It can come at any time. If you remember, there was the white horse we looked at last week.
Oh, Mr. Ed.
How'd he get in here?
He's not really white. He's a pale horse.
No, it's a stretch.
It's my favorite show.
That was Clint Eastwood that just flew by. Anyway, comic relief. What do you call them? Sunday funnies.
Yes,
Yeah.
Sunday sillies.
Sunday silly. All right. We tiptoed in the Olivet Discourse. We just looked at it just really briefly. We looked at the questions. I'm off track. Hold on. Bear with me. Here we are. That would make, if Mr. Ed was the white horse, that would make Wilbur the Antichrist.
Oh my God.
Wilbur.
That's a stretch too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, that's why I put that at the beginning of everything. So, get back to being serious. Last week, Jesus opened the scroll, and he broke the first seal. We saw the white horse. The white horse was, this isn't a cowboy movie. The white horse is not the good guy, okay? We talked about this being the Antichrist. He's being a Christ imposter. It cannot be Jesus. Jesus is standing in the throne room, allowing all this to happen. The crown on this rider is wrong. This is not a, excuse me. This is not a, this is a wreath. It's not a crown of royalty. It's not a diadem. And this rider, this guy, is going to lead an organized rebellion against God. All right, we're going to see war's going to be behind him. Famine's going to be behind them. Death's going to be following them. The second seal, when he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come." And another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to take peace from the earth, and that men would slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. So this brings John another vision of another horse, of course, but a horse of a different color. So this horse, again, John saw horses, but this horse symbolizes something different. But we're going to see the horses are all connected, okay? This horse tells us there's something new coming. Red symbolizes the color of bloodshed. And we're told back in verse 4 that the effect of this horse is to take peace from the earth. Okay? Again, the rider is called he. Well, it's not called he. The first, on the white horse, he was called he, like we should know who it is. This one verbally says, literally says the one.
To him, I have to him.
To him. Okay, yeah, different versions. It's the Antichrist again, okay? His rise to power is changing as he rises in power. He brings peace with the fake peace treaty. And then this rider shows up after the signing of the covenant and the peace treaty and starts taking that peace away. War will erupt on earth. This war is going to start out small, and it's probably going to grow into World War III. It'll be a major war. It's just another show of birth pangs will be getting worse.
So that's when the Antichrist, 3.5 years, breaks his covenant. The red horse.
Not necessarily, because war, there's going to be peace, but war's not going to happen. Personally, I don't think we're going to have peace for 3.5 years. Or I don't think there's going to be peace for 3.5 years. This rider's going to come pretty quick. Remember, it's birth pangs.
Yeah.
Okay? So he's going to start taking peace away little by little. And then maybe at the mid-trib, right there at 3.5 years is boom, when everything breaks loose, maybe. Okay? So I think as soon as he deceives everybody with the covenant, I think war will, or not war, but peace will start disappearing as soon as it gets here, if that makes sense. Okay, little by little. As war happens, one of the things that follows war is famine. And that takes us to the third seal. When he broke the third seal, I heard the third living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard something like a voice in the center of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine." So Jesus, again, he's here, he's breaking the seals. This horse leads to a new phase on the earth. Once more, John's told to look down and see what happens. So we know it's happening on earth. The rider is unnamed, and again, called he. It's the Antichrist. We're still looking at the impact. Again, it's symbolic for what the Antichrist is going to bring to the world. Black could symbolize a lot of things, but let's look at this in context, which is famine, and we'll see that in a minute. Let's look at the scales first. These scales are like this. Back in those days, this was their cash register, if you will. The coins back then were actually made of a precious metal, gold, silver, whatever the case may be. And they were a certain weight. So a denarius was 2.5 grams. I just guessed at that. I have it here a couple of paragraphs later. And they would take, a merchant had a 2.5 gram weight, okay? So he would put that weight on the scale and then the coin. And if it balanced, he knew the coin was good. What happened, the reason this came about is because people would shave the silver off their coins, and instead of weighing 2.5 grams, it weighed 2.4 grams. And then they would do that every time, and then after a certain amount of time, they'd have another coin. And it worked the other way around too. The merchant could adjust his weight. So anyway, this is thought that this is the Antichrist holding the scales is leading to economic despair on the earth. It's the impact of what war is going to do. The red horse takes the peace, okay? The worse the war, the worse the impact of the war. if it is indeed World War III with nukes and nuclear weapons, it's going to be really ugly. And there will be food shortages all over the world. And when there's food shortages, what happens to the price of food? It skyrockets.
It's a little hard to grow crops during a nuclear winter, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's like the plight of in Europe, in the Irish, a couple hundred years ago, when they had that cold weather for 2-3 years.
so in Revelation 6:6, it says that Yeah, and I heard something like a voice in the center of the four living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. So who's telling this to John? If it's from the center of the four creatures, it has to be Christ, okay, that's saying this. A quick footnote, it's 4.5 grams. I'm sorry, I was off a little bit. So,
It says a day's wages in my book.
right, it's a day's wages. A denarius was invented by the Romans. It was first introduced in 211 BC. A day laborer in Rome was usually paid a denarius a day, and that was before taxes. So in John's day, 1 denarius bought 12 quarts of wheat. 1 quart of wheat produced about 1.5 loaves of bread, which was enough food to feed a family for a day. This gave them plenty of leftover money to buy other things like meat and cheese and olive oil and whatever else. So a family could almost exist for 2 weeks on a denarius. But when the Antichrist happens and this famine hits and the runaway inflation hits, we're told that the denarius will only buy 1 quart of wheat, 3 quarts of barley. Barley was a cheaper grain. You could make more bread out of it. It would spread the money. It would help spread the food a little bit. Somebody did the calculation and figured out that a loaf of bread's going to cost $60.
That's Bidenomics.
I don't know how the grams go to troy ounces, but they used to use troy ounces years ago. I mean, that's an old standard. And the silver dollars are based on troy ounces.
Right.
1 troy ounce right now is about $25 an ounce, but it's gone down. But yeah, that's still.
So with this hyperinflation,
Hyperinflation.
we're going to have panic, we're going to have crime, looting, starvation, whole 9 yards, okay? Don't do that. It's going to affect, as I said, let's see. 2 products are going forward. 2 products are specifically said not to damage, and that is wine and oil. Scholars disagree on all of this. Why? One of the answers that I kind of favor is that, again, this is symbolic, and wine and oil are some of Israel's chief crops, okay? So this is symbolic, saying, don't damage this because this takes up a lot of land in Israel, and I don't want that land destroyed, okay?
That's interesting. That's an interesting point of view, because I've probably heard more on the other side of it. It symbolizes their wealth,
Right.
and so you can't have 2 gods, your money and the God. And so those who have the wealth are going to be fine throughout this little case.
And I've heard that as well. And I just,
I've not heard yours, so that's a really interesting.
yeah, it's to save the land. So to save Israel from massive destruction.
Yeah.
Right now, Israel exports a lot of fruits and vegetables throughout Europe and a lot of other places right now. They're, because of their drip irrigation and their technology that, you know, the Muslims even wanted to reproduce. But they're not using Israel as far as the exporter. They're doing it through a second party because everybody hates Israel, so they want to go through a second party to.
It's amazing how much they export, actually.
Yeah.
We kind of found that out, the farmland there.
Is
That,
that related to his first miracle? Anyway,
I've heard that before too, but I don't, again, I don't know. Scholars don't, they all disagree too, so I don't, you know, whatever.
What it says here in the study Bible on the oil and the wine is that it sets a limit on the destruction of the rider of the black horse. The roots of the olive and vine go deeper and would not be immediately affected by a limited drought.
Is that MacArthur?
NIV study.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and that makes sense too. Yeah, and you can pick one, it's fine.
Because olive trees are drought tolerant, so are Russian, and those are drought tolerant trees.
Yeah, so
Which
I
is
pick
smart
one.
Because it's a desert.
I want to get through the fourth horse today. Let's get going here. Revelation 6:7, when the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beast of the earth. Fourth horse, new color. We're still looking at these horses are all connected. We're looking at the impact of the Antichrist increasing power. This horse changes the pattern a little bit because now the rider is named, and it's death, and we're also told that Hades is following him. That adds a little bit of mystery. Yeah, I'll skip that. The rider of the fourth horse is death, and Hades is there. Hades and death aren't real people. Death is a condition, and Hades is a place. The logical interpretation of the final horse is that we're seeing the final and ultimate effect of the Antichrist rise to power. If that makes sense. I'll get into this in a minute. He's going to bring widespread death upon the earth. He has Hades with him. This is representative of death for the unsaved, if you will. Okay? The color of the horse is ashen. It's literally translated green. The word is chloros. It's from where we get chlorophyll. The suggestion of this horse's color is that it's the same thing that happens to a body as it's decaying. Okay? And left unburied in the air. This war is going to leave a quarter of humanity dead. Nothing like that has happened. Nothing like that has been documented to happen in our history. Today's population is 8 billion people. We're talking about 2 billion people dying. World War I was 22 million. World War II was 56 million. this is going to be unimaginable devastation. And these deaths are accumulation of the first four horses, or the first four horses, okay, the horses.
Now, is that during the first part of the tribulation?
Uh,
Are these in sequence, because you got the trumpets coming?
You weren't supposed to ask me that question. Answer is maybe. Okay, there's disagreement on this as well.
Well, because I've heard people say, well, the first half of the tribulation won't be so bad, but I'm
Right.
thinking it will be bad.
Well, it will, and I'm gonna get to,
If you knew, the devil would know, and he ain't telling.
I'm gonna get back to Daniel here in a second. So,
We're pre-trib, we're in the mezzanine.
What do they do with all the bodies?
well, the bodies are left unburied.
They should reap.
So,
Eagles will gather together during the,
yeah.
They'll be eaten
Yeah.
up.
I hate to be an eagle then.
So, from the people living right now, so to answer your question, I'm going to teach that it's sequential. Okay? A lot of people take these first few seals as an overview of Revelation, okay, of the tribulation of the 7 years. Could be, I don't know. Okay,
Well, there's gonna be so much chaos after the rapture,
right,
that everything's gonna be in chaos, so someone's gonna come along and say they can fix it. But there's still gonna be God's wrath
right.
on the
It's,
first part of the tribulation, is that not right?
well, this is God's wrath.
That's what I'm saying, isn't
Right.
that, I put it in sequence too, but I wasn't sure.
It gets back to, like Bill said, is the first writer, is there peace for 3.5 years in the first part of tribulation? Some say yes, I don't think so. Some say no. Again, it's one of those things. It's what makes Revelation A, interesting,
Yeah.
and B, confusing, okay? Because there's really, I mean, there's no consensus to speak of. I mean, if there is a consensus, it's the futurist view, it's pre-tribulation, it's
All
premillennialism.
the bad things you think can happen, either nuclear weapons, Fauci opening up a new lab besides Wuhan and causing other plagues that destroy more than 1 million people, you know? So you got millions of people dying from that, you got
But
millions
that's
of people
man's
dying
wrath.
from radiation.
That's
Yeah,
man's
yeah.
wrath,
Yeah, but-
I mean, this is God's wrath.
Yeah, but on Earth, you know, we're destroying ourselves too.
People, at this point in time, people don't recognize this as God's wrath, though,
Okay.
okay? They think this is all caused by climate change. Because all this stuff can be, I mean, wars happen, famine happens. You know, we looked at the famine a couple weeks ago, how it's growing daily. Earthquakes, all this is natural, so people don't, they're like, oh, climate change or whatever, you know, so.
Yeah, experts said that carbon monoxide is 0.5 of our atmosphere. And and then the Congress interrupted, one said 0.7, one said I don't think it's more than 0.8. And the real facts are, carbon monoxide is 0.002 of our atmosphere, so it's not enough to kill anybody right now, but they're making it to where we gotta give money to all this. It's another way of creating another agenda to drain everybody's money.
Always follow the money. That's all I can say, because it's always been about money. So
Yeah.
even back when the hole was in the ozone, it was all about money. Again, people on earth don't know. We know because we study God's word. The fifth seal, time is it? 32. Let me see if I have this slide. Oh, there's the ashen horse, the green horse, death, sickle.
Or the pale horse, what they call it, pale horse. Same thing.
Mr. Ed.
Yeah. We'll take the last few minutes. This, I ran across this actually last night and thought it was really interesting. I'm gonna stop, we'll look at the fifth seal next week, so we'll start with that. This is a good stopping place. This slide, can you read it?
It's a little rough.
Is from, ouch. It's a website called Our World in Data. Okay, you might like this website because there's a lot of data there.
Oh, yeah,
And-
WHO, yeah.
And I did not drill down on this, but I looked at this slide, and the reason this talks about pestilence, about all the viruses throughout history. The Black Plague, it starts with Black Plague, it gets into the Colombian, Russian flu. Now, if you haven't read how many people have died from the COVID-19 epidemic, the way they formulate this, it's 27 million people. So now, and I debated on whether to put this up or not, because the way they calculate this is if you look at actual numbers, and that figure is like to date, I think it's
That's the world number.
the world number and it's over the past 3 years, but it's not the actual number of recorded COVID deaths is a lot less than that.
Yeah.
The way they calculate this data they did it for the AIDS, for the HIV, 33 million and for AIDS and HIV. I remember it being bad, but I don't remember it being that bad. Spanish flu was 50 to 100 million deaths. What they do is that they look at total deaths. And don't quote me on this because I'm going to screw this up, okay? But they look at total deaths. They look at deaths caused by COVID that are recorded by COVID. Then they looked at all the other reasons that people died, which left them with a number of deaths that were undetermined, okay? They didn't put all of them in there. They had another formula where they figured out that maybe from the description that it was COVID. Same thing, I'm pretty sure that all these numbers are based on that same formula. And again, I didn't take time to drill down to.
If you had a motorcycle accident and had COVID, you died from COVID, not the
It's,
motorcycle
yeah, they
accident.
finally had to, I think it was in 2021, the CDC had to differentiate between those patients who died with COVID and those that died from COVID. But the numbers in the beginning from 2020 to 21 were greatly faltered in the United States, especially. They were actually elevated because of the inconsistencies in the reporting. The reason I know is I do the
So
reporting.
they got $17,000 per
Yes.
patient because they got,
And also
so
because
then
of the
you
money.
follow the money.
It was the
and there
money,
is.
it was the money, they got a lot of, if you reported, you got reimbursed better. But it finally, the CDC had to back step and had to finally go back and look at with and due to. Because you could die with a positive test and they'd say, well, you died from COVID and there was money involved.
Yes,
It's
I
very
heard a million
ugly.
Americans died. Now, I don't know if it was
Yes.
with or from COVID.
And not
That's-
every state in the United States
Accurately
reported
reported, yeah.
accurately.
Yeah.
And they all reported as they.
So it's faulty data, it's faulty data.
COVID related.
Well, and this website, I'm 99% sure this data was updated at the end of the year.
They probably got it from they probably got the data from CDC,
More people died from
because
the
that's
Oh,
where
I
you
think
get
they got
most
it
of
from
or
different,
MMWR. or
probably
something.
WHO too.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
anyway, I just thought it was an interesting slide because we're talking about pestilence in the end times.
And that-
This
another
just
thing
shows
about
how
the study,
devastating pestilence can
They
be.
showed during the Black Plague where they found out the mice, started the plague. They found out that widows, less widows died from the plague than single male, because they kept their houses cleaner and there wasn't as many mice. That was another, another thing that added to that, so.
I think if you look at it, what's really statistically interesting to me is that, yeah, we had pestilence, but we have a lot of pestilence in this century.
Right,
I mean, amazing, swine flu and,
Right.
every type of flu. We have a lot of pestilence.
there's a
now.
lot of pestilence going on that you don't hear
And
about.
we have a clean environment. We live in a clean society, but we have a lot of pestilence from the days back in the old days.
One of the things,
That's after we got rid of all our chemical weapons.
one of the things that I found interesting is during the Black Plague, oh, I just had a senior moment. Who was attacking? The Mongolians were actually taking bodies that had died from Black Plague and were
Throwing them over the
catapulting them
wall.
over the walls
Jerusalem,
into
so they
cities and
could
stuff,
infect the people in
so that they would
Jerusalem,
kill them in the
They
city.
used it as biological weapons. They
So-
put them on the trebuchets and just over
Kind
the
of
walls.
demoralize it too.
Yeah,
Not
it's,
just biological,
Yeah.
right,
psychological,
psychological, the whole 9 yards.
yeah.
All right, who would, any volunteers? Huh?
You can go on.
No, so, we'll save the next seals because it gets interesting, the 144 and all that stuff for next week, so I don't want to glaze over it. Volunteers to pray us out? Anybody?
Well, thank you for your research and everything you do here, Lyle. I mean, it's sincere. It's, I don't have the time to do it, and I appreciate it.
Well, it's fun, so
Yeah.
I enjoy it. And like I say, I feel like I'm being led, like, I really don't understand how I came across this slide, but it popped up and I'm like, okay, well, I guess I should show it, so.
Well, I'm glad you're going slow through it rather than just, trying to get through a chapter of meeting,
Right.
I like this.
Thank you.
Lyle, is that United States information or world?
That's world, that's world. So, I think that, I don't even want to guess. I forget. I looked up the actual data of people that died from COVID and it was not that high, but anyway, I don't remember, because
I
it was,
wouldn't worry about that data. Fauci, he faked the data anyway. He knew he faked it, and later okay, I faked it.
all right. Volunteers to pray
Tell us what you
again?
really think.
Yeah, tell us what you really think.
He's the highest paid civil servant in the United States right now. Fauci makes more than the president does. Shame, but.
All right.
I'll pray.
Oh, thank you.
Pray out, okay.
Okay.
Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for this most informative time, Lord. We believe that you have, you touched Lyle so that and showed him the things that he needs to share and to explain the things that he needs to explain for those of us that are struggling with it. And we praise you and thank you for that opportunity that you've provided us. And Lord, we just ask for your hand to be upon this group of people as we go out. Lord, bless their week. Allow them to continue to seek more knowledge from you, Lord. Protect their activities, and may they have and we thank you again in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.